Sexuality is part of all that is our life. It's a dimension present in many moments of life, even when we don't realize it. Recently, a friend told me about a funny thing that happened on the way to the dentist. She gave me permission to share this story. She was chatting with her child in the car when the little girl asked her where people come from. Before my friend could start in with a lesson about the birds and the bees, the daughter observed that there would always be people on Earth because people make more people. But Mommy, where did the first people come from? She wanted to know. My friend silently reminded herself of the parenting rule with young children to answer only the question they are actually asking. So she began her best age-appropriate summary of evolution. But the child was not interested in primordial soup or primates. She already had her answer. God made the first people, she announced confidently. We came out of God's belly. God gave birth to everything. So there you have it, the original religion, goddess cosmology, developed spontaneously by a 6-year-old. The child clearly knew something about pregnancy and birth, what my friend originally thought the question was about. Where do people come from? But the child's real question was where the original humans came from. You can see the logic in her answer. It's so easy to make God in our own image. Just prior to this conversation, for what it's worth, my friend mentioned that she had been singing along to I Am Woman. Coincidence? We can chuckle at the child's procreative leap of logic, but it points to something important. That sexuality and religion are not separate realms of life. They have been linked for as long as religion has existed in human culture. Sometimes in ways that affirm life, and alas, other times in ways that can harm. I did a little crowdsourcing on this topic. You may have noticed as we're Facebook friends. And I heard from people in our time who have experienced religion having a negative impact on their sense of self as a sexual being. Several people commented that growing up, sex was just something that people didn't talk about, especially in church. Silence on the subject can speak volumes about what is taboo or not okay. But plenty of religious communities have quite explicitly expressed condemnation, contempt, or pity for those who are gay or lesbian, or who otherwise counter old social norms. This can undercut a person's most basic sense of self-worth. I've met quite a few Unitarian Universalists, or UUs, who are gay, lesbian, bisexual, or transgender, who were surprised and relieved to find our welcoming congregations after having the experience elsewhere of their full selves not being welcomed and honored. Straight people don't escape scrutiny or pressure either. One woman shared the story of going to confessional as a Catholic teenager and confessing to sexual experimentation with a boy. It was nothing that would have gotten her pregnant or endangered her virginity, but the priest insisted she should immediately marry the boy. Needless to say, she was never so forthcoming in the confessional again. And eventually she left the Catholic faith. Another person, this one raised Baptist, told me, one harmful thing I was taught was that even in my thoughts, I was always guarded against thinking about sex in the wrong way or too much. That it was best not to think about it at all until I was married. That lustful thoughts were sins in themselves. She said, since this is impossible, I was always filled with guilt. For others, the connection between religion and sex that stands out in their childhood memories is the sexual transgressions of religious leaders. Jimmy Swaggart and other televangelists were all over TV and magazines in my formative years, one person wrote. They said, the ministers were always crying and begging forgiveness, and the women involved were painted as harlots. And let me acknowledge that I've also heard from born and raised Unitarian Universalists who remember some of our religious leaders engaging in in what today we could clearly call sexual misconduct. But I also heard from people for whom religious traditions had carried important and helpful messages about sexuality. For example, teaching reverence and respect for sexuality. Affirming every Sunday that they are inherently a good, worthy person. Giving factual, accurate information about sexuality that could then be shared with peers who were not well served by the sex ed in public schools. Learning in church that sex was complex, not good or bad in a black or white way, but complicated, something requiring thoughtful decisions. Helping them learn how to make decisions about what was right for them, what they did and did not want to do with a partner, and be ready to communicate. Many, but not all of those people who named positive things within religious communities that they learned about sexuality stated that they learned them in Unitarian Universalist congregations. But there were also folks raised in mainline Christian traditions who said they were taught that sexuality was a good gift of God. A friend of mine who is Buddhist, who is also a survivor of sexual abuse, spoke of how she had found healing in Buddhism. For example, in the many images by artists of gods and goddesses and sexual embraces. In response to my crowdsourcing post, others talked about religious communities supporting them as a whole, including sexual person, in such ways as the following. Loving the person I love. Modeling that queer relationships are just as healthy and normal as straight ones. Respecting me in general and my whole humanness. Helping me realize I'm not alone in my thinking as someone who believes in diversity and equality. Opening up doors through our children's participation in Our Whole Lives program for our whole family to have conversations that have deepened our relationships. Another person wrote about going through a welcoming congregation year. This is when a UU church like Westside does deep educational work around sexual orientation, culminating in a deliberate congregational decision to welcome all. This person said, I learned to put my value, my vague goodwill, why not, into positive statements. She was pointing to how religious community can expand our horizons of understanding and compassion, and help us to live out our values of inclusion, including in the area of sexual justice. Talking about sexuality, I believe, is an important part of creating sexually healthy lives and sexually healthy congregations, too. It's important to talk about because things that are not talked about tend to become, at best, places of restricted growth and expression in our lives. And at worst, they can become places of shame, guilt, pain, and suffering. And we do not want that for anyone. The title of this reflection, Let's Talk About Sex, Our Whole Lives, has two meanings. Besides the George Michael Association that other people who listen to pop music in the 80s like me might have. One is that sex is part of each human being as a whole person, part of our wholeness. So of course it's something we should talk about. The other is that we should keep talking about sex throughout our entire lives, from early childhood and adolescence to young adulthood and later adulthood. That's why the Our Whole Lives, or OWL, sexuality curriculum has modules for multiple age levels. This year, we will be offering a curriculum for high schoolers and also the program for adults. Next year, we anticipate offering an OWL series for young adults. If you are intrigued by the idea of participating in the adult class, you can look for sign-up details later this calendar year. Adult OWL will most likely start in January. As it happens, when I became a UU, one of the first religious education experiences I had was taking About Your Sexuality, which was the predecessor curriculum to OWL. This was in my home congregation as a young adult. It was almost 20 years ago, but I found that several memories really stayed strongly with me. The sexuality class for young adults was frank stood out to me. Before that, I don't remember having had direct conversations on these topics with a group of people since sex ed class in high school. But in the cozy church library, with our covenants hanging on the wall and snacks and drinks waiting nearby, we covered a lot more ground than the usual sex ed territory of anatomy and physiology, safe sex, and pregnancy prevention. The subject of sexuality was approached in a way that was both holistic and surprisingly comfortable. I think one of the most significant parts of that experience for me was open conversation with peers about sexual orientation. During my years of high school and then college, where I grew up in small-town Iowa, this was not something people around me had talked about. I am straight, and I easily fit into the heterosexual norms that pervade our society. I had not seen what was undoubtedly right before my eyes all along, that there might be people left out or closeted in the social environments that I moved through easily. But when I started graduate school at a large university, several of my classmates were out gay people. And at my UU church, too. There was a big rainbow welcoming congregation sign by the door. And there were out gay, lesbian, bisexual, and transgender people participating in every facet of congregational life, including lay leaders, later including ministers, and including people I was hanging out with in the young adult group. Unitarian Universalism is what made sexual diversity a normal, visible, comfortable part of being in community for me. It also raised my consciousness about the pain and persecution that many GLBT people did suffer and do still suffer. Before I heard real people's stories, I just didn't realize it wasn't talked about. My young adult group also heard from older adults in the congregation as part of the class. The conversation that most stands out to me was with a long married couple who talked together with us about how to handle attractions to other people when those arose. They acknowledged that it was human to develop crushes, and this was apt to happen even to people who were happily, monogamously married. This couple modeled for us how to talk honestly, compassionately with one another when such feelings developed, able even to chuckle about an infatuation after it passed, and always clear that their commitment was to each other. This honest communication and the acceptance of normal human feelings was something really beautiful to witness. So I think there's a lot to be said for discussing such subjects in a community of shared values and respect. As with any topic, sometimes we learn more about ourselves by listening to others. Sometimes we find our voice by speaking our truth to others. And it is easier to embark on a new learning with a spirit of open curiosity if we do not have to do it alone. As Starhawk wrote, "Community means strength that joins our strength to do the work that needs to be done. Arms to hold us when we falter, a circle of healing, a circle of friends, someplace where we can be free." I hope many of you will take advantage of the opportunity to talk about sex in the strength of community by signing up for Adult Owl this winter. Meanwhile, when I began preparing for this reflection, I brainstormed a list of 30 reasons we talk about sex at church. I'm not going to tell you all of them. I narrowed it down to a top 10 list for you, which will finish off this reflection. Can I have a drum roll, please? The number 10 reason for talking about sex at church is that there's a close connection between sexuality and spirituality. Religion encompasses feelings of awe, wonder, interconnection, and transcendence of self. And these are all things that people may experience through their sexuality. Many mystics speak of God or other names for the holy as as one might speak of a lover, longing for divine union, longing for falling away of the separate sense of self, an experience of belonging and immersion in some greater whole. One of my responders on Facebook said, "I think of sex as more of a spiritual thing. It's more about energy and becoming one." Number 9 is because, like everything else in our personality and life, our sexuality can evolve over a lifetime. People benefit from supportive spaces to listen for who they are now and what they want and need now. And as a culture, we keep learning more about this complex facet of our humanity. One of our West Side youth, I suspect, educated more than a few of us with her recent post on social media. This was on National Coming Out Day. Not only did she come out as not being straight, she took the time with love and a sprinkling of humor to explain what her sexual identity is. She wrote, "I am pansexual. That means that I am not attracted to cookware, but I am attracted to all genders. Parts, not parts." There's always more to learn about ourselves and others. Number 8, because will, the strengthening of will and refining of the capacity to choose, is a fundamental role of religious practices and community. And it is enormously important in sexual ethics and sexual justice. I believe our faith community should support us in growing our capacity to make healthy choices for the expression of our sexuality and our ability to act out those choices so that we have integrity in how we live out our sexual natures. By the way, that includes the choice of celibacy, which can be a sound choice for many people at times. The number 7 reason we talk about sex at church is because we religious liberals still believe in empowering people to plan parenthood. We want to support people in their reproductive lives, whatever their choices. That includes supporting people when they choose not to have children, or when they struggle with infertility, as well as when people want children and are able to have them by birth or adoption. Number 6 is because sex is important to most committed partnerships, and the church can play a positive role in supporting the relationships of its members. Most couples need to give thoughtful attention to the sexual aspect of their relationship to remain close and fulfilled over the course of years together. Got 5 more left. Some of you have guesses what they are. Number 5, because survivors of sexual assault and abuse are everywhere. I won't cite the pages of appalling statistics. I started looking at them and I just couldn't take it. But whether or not we realize it, each of us has people in our social circles, including in our religious community, who have been victims of rape or sexual assault or abuse, either as children or as adults. Though girls and women are targeted more often, boys and men are harmed too. No racial ethnic group or education level or economic strata of society is immune from this danger. Survivors of sexual abuse and assault are in all religious communities, which means we have an opportunity to provide support for their healing. Number 4, relatedly, we can be sure that if survivors are everywhere, as they are, then people who may commit acts of harm and people who have already done so may be in all of our social circles too. Whether we know it or not, they are likely to be in our religious community. So we need to know how to protect our children and members of our community from harm, now and the present. We also have the opportunity to help prevent harmful behaviors in the future through education into our values, through things like OWL. And we need to understand what positive role we might play in supporting people who have harmed others in the past and who have gotten help and committed to not repeating the harmful behavior. Religious community can be an important part of that change for the better. And you may know that we have a Safe Congregations Committee here at Westside, as most UU congregations do, that works to prevent all types of harm at our church, including sexual harm. in which sexual activity among people actually occurs. But feelings and relationships are a vital part of this. Along with parents and families who are children's first teachers, religious communities can help people of all ages explore and express feelings and think through the relationships that are involved with sexuality. Number 2, to counter harmful messages we receive from society all our lives about sex, and implicitly about the worth of some people versus other people. For example, the idea that boys will be boys and it's a girl's job to fight off those irascible boys. One person wrote, "Growing up, I learned from friends, magazines, books, movies, not much from school or parents. What I wish is that it would have been taught and talked about as a normal part of our being as it is now. And I wish there was more emphasis on the necessity that it should be egalitarian." I could not agree more. Teaching about consent and respect and mutuality is still so desperately needed throughout our society, as current events continuously remind us. From college campuses to bar rooms, bedrooms, and yes, locker rooms. The number one reason we talk about sex at church is because religion is about our wholeness as persons. And sexuality is part of the whole of who we are. If you try to excise sexuality from the rest of life, you make people less whole, not more. Several people who responded to my questions wrote along these lines too. One said, "My sexuality is part of who I am, something I can't really separate from the rest of my identity, spirituality, and values." Another person wrote that from being UU and teaching OWL, "I learned and somehow knew this, though I had never really seen it as part of normal conversations or discussions, that our sexuality is as much a part of our whole being as everything else about us." So that is your top 10 list of why we talk about sex here. There are so many important arenas in which sexuality intersects with our values of inclusion, our quest for social justice, the search for truth and meaning, as well as joy and connection, our spiritual work of healing, and our experience of being part of this interdependent web of all life. So, let's keep talking about sex. Let's keep talking about sex in church. Let's keep talking about sex for our whole lives. May it be so. Amen. I invite you to stand and bow your spirit and join me in singing our closing hymn, number 207.